spots, because otherwise I'll never get through everything. Okay, so prevention, one of the really key preventive methods that we have in gardens and landscapes is to choose plants that don't have pest problems. So these can be plants that have been developed to be resistant to key problems. So we do have roses that are resistant to powdery mildew, crepe myrtle also. But also there's a lot of plants that are naturally pest resistant, often but not always. Some of our native plants, but other plants that are well adapted and don't have problems. So pick your plants carefully, and that can prevent a lot of problems. Good gardening practices, sometimes called cultural controls, are things that you would ordinarily do in your garden, but you do them in a way that's a little bit different to prevent pest problems. So this means choosing the right site for your plants. So don't grow plants that are very susceptible to root rots in places where you get a lot of soggy wetness. Sanitation means getting rid of overwintering sites or food sources that can be important in maintaining pest populations. So even with ants, getting rid of the food sources is important. With almonds, the navel orangeworm overwinters in mummy nuts that are left on the tree. Codling moth will overwinter in apples or pears that are on the tree or on the ground. So get those mummies out in the wintertime so that the next season you don't have them around. Habitat modification means making the habitat less favorable for the pests. So pests need food and water and shelter, and so think about what does that pest need. So do you have roof rats? And one of the things with roof rats is roof rats need a nest. And usually where there's a roof rat problem, somebody's providing a habitat very nearby for that roof rat nest. And so it's often ivy growing up a tree right next to a house, or very thick, dense vegetation next to the house. And if you pull that out, clean that out, the roof rat problem will probably go away. You can use all the toxic baits and traps, but you probably won't get control of that population until you get rid of the habitat. So think about that habitat that you are providing for the pests. Water management, talked about that before. Number one reason our plants decline, but water management also feeds into certain kinds of pests are encouraged by water practices. So for instance, when you're overwatering or getting the crowns of trees wet too much, then that's really going to provide a good inducement for phytophthora root or crown rot, and some of the downy mildews and other fungal diseases are favored by sprinkler irrigation. And then good fertilizer management. You do need to fertilize turf occasionally, but you don't want to over-fertilize it. But the thing about turf is you need it to be out-competing the weeds, so it needs to be growing more vigorously than the weeds in the ground. But many of our other plants, and you do need to fertilize fruit trees and plants that you're growing for flowers. But a lot of our ornamentals, especially our native plants, that you are not growing for really lavish flowers, various woody plants, they don't really need much fertilization. Certainly in the Central Valley of California, they've shown that woody ornamental trees don't need any fertilizer because we've got enough in the soil. And when you use too much fertilizer, you can increase plant problems because you cause the plants to have this big, lush vegetative growth, which is really attractive to aphids, to all kinds of sucking insects that are attracted to this kind of growth. So you will be increasing the abundance of those types of plants, lacebugs and psyllids and those types of things. So don't over-fertilize. Fertilizer is a real water pollutant too. There's been a lot of attention placed on pesticides in the water, and probably not enough attention placed on fertilizer in the water, because fertilizer can be very bad for aquatic ecosystems as well, and it's not regulated. So, good gardening practice is really important. And for lawns, for instance, we talk about fertilizing properly, irrigating properly, and then mowing properly. One of the things about turf is you want to mow it at the right height. If you mow your turf too short, then it doesn't have the strength to outcompete weeds. It doesn't have the strength to resist some of the insect and pathogen problems. So you want to mow it at the right height, and that's one thing you find at like putting greens. They mow it like this short, and it's really hard to keep those grasses alive. And you want to choose a turf species that is suitable for your area. Now there's more drought-resistant turf species, some no-mow turf species. Some of these are really good choices, particularly where we're thinking about drought and that type of thing. We have a whole UC guide to healthy lawns that you'll briefly look at this afternoon when we get on the computers. Physical and mechanical control is just, your imagination is the limit here. So yeah, you can stomp on those cockroaches. You can pick those hornworms off of the tomato plants. You can cultivate your weeds. You can mow down weeds. You can do flaming or steaming, but you have to be careful not to light the mulch on fire with the flaming. Mulches are very important for weed control. Solarization, clear plastic on the top of the bare moist soil for 6 weeks in the hottest part of the year will get rid of most weeds, most pathogens, and nematodes, at least down to 12 inches. Traps are our primary way of managing vertebrate pests like gophers and ground squirrels and rats and things like that. But we also have some traps that are used for some insect pests. You can trap snails and slugs. And so there's various kinds of traps. Screens. Of course, you want to screen your windows to keep mosquitoes and other flies out. But you can also have row covers to keep many of these seedling pests out. And so screening can be very important. And different kinds of barriers, like row covers. We've got copper barriers to deter snails. So there's all kinds of methods. Each of them is sort of tailored to the individual pest. So here, once you know what your pest is, then you're going to go to your resources, either books or online, and you'll find various physical, mechanical, biological, and chemical controls or cultural controls that work for those pests. These are just examples. Biological control is the use of living species to control other pests. So it's any activity of one species that deters another, and they're living natural enemies that are the agents of biological control. This is an assassin bug. It's a leafhopper assassin bug. It's sticking, it's got sucking mouth parts. It grabs the leafhopper out. It's got pretty good forelegs. Grabs the leafhopper out of the sky and sticks its proboscis in there. It's a sucking insect. Sucks out the content of the leafhopper and pulls it. So there's wonderful drama going out in your garden, and you probably have not fully appreciated it. So go out there with your hand lens or without it and look for these things. So there's lots of, in biological controls, one of the things I really like, so there's predators, and biological control is really important in the management of insect and mite pests. We know much less about how biological control works for fungal pathogens, nematodes that are pests in the soil, but we know it's there, and we do know something about it. We do know that it's very important to have a diversity of microorganisms in your soil, because there are good soil microorganisms that are out-competing the ones that cause pathogenicity, and so that's one reason why you don't want to sterilize your soil. Well, you do want to sterilize your soil in potting soil, but you in your soil where you're growing things in your garden, you want to keep it a nice, healthy healthy, diverse group of organisms working in there. And then weeds, there's biological control of weeds too. Of course, there's lots of insects that are naturally feeding on weeds, vertebrates too, and we've got geese and chicken and that can be useful in gardens. They're good for biological control of insects too. And then we're seeing more and more parks or larger properties having sheep or goats coming in and maintaining the properties there. So it's a little bit of a biological control there too. But I'm just going to briefly talk about biological control of insects. I'm almost running out of time, but let me get through this. So we have three groups of natural enemies. We have predators. Those are the little hunters in the system, like the lady beetles. Parasites are parasitoids, and they work much more quietly in the system, but are very important. And then pathogens, insects die from fungal diseases, bacterial diseases, protozoan diseases, nematodes out there in your garden. So look out for signs of all of these types of activities, because biological control is going on all the time. So parasites are little wasp species, and also there's some fly species, particularly tachinid flies, that are actually serve as parasites or truly parasitoids. They're parasitic only in their immature stages, not in their adult stages. So this is the life cycle of a typical parasite. This is an aphid parasite. So what they're doing here is, this is a little wasp, and she is stinging the aphid, laying an egg inside the aphid. And that egg is going to hatch into a larva, a little wasp larva, and it's going to eat out the inside of that aphid and kill it. And that kills it. And then it forms a pupa, a cocoon pupa inside the skin of the dead aphid. And then when it's ready to emerge as an adult, it cuts a hole open and emerges an adult, mates, and then goes on laying eggs and more aphids. And even though this one only just killed one aphid, the female wasp that might come out of there may lay eggs in 200 aphids when she comes out. So, and the life cycle is often not much more than a week. So it can rapidly get all the aphids in your population if you've got these little parasites. But you don't see these little wasps. They're tiny. They don't live very long. And what you do see is you see evidence of it. So you see dead aphids with holes in the mummified aphids. The thing about it, a lot of people don't like wasps. I don't put them up as one of those pests, but people don't like wasps. They don't like wasps because wasps sting me. But the fact is, most wasps, 95% of the wasp species, don't have the capability of stinging you. Plus, only the female ones can do it, because the wasp stinger is actually an egg-laying device. And most wasps use that egg-laying device responsibly, which is to stick it in an aphid or a caterpillar and lay an egg in it. And so they are, these little wasps, there's some of the little wasps are gall makers, so they make like those oak galls you see, and they are stinging the oak material, and that causes, they put a little toxin in there, causes proliferation of the tissue of the oak, and that provides a place for their larvae, which is inside to feed on the oak. But these are the parasites. This is an aphid parasite. They're parasites. Most of them only parasitize one or a few related pests, but virtually almost every insect has got some parasite species out there that will kill it. And in some cases, they'll get 95% of the population, and some they'll only get 10%, but they're a very important part of our biological control system out there. So here we have a hypersoda wasp laying an egg in a caterpillar. We popped open the caterpillar here. This green thing is actually the larva of a wasp that's growing inside. When this caterpillar dies, this is the skin of the unfortunate caterpillar, and stuck on it is a cocoon of the hypersoda wasp. So when you're out there, you probably not going to see these little wasps that much. If you want to see the larvae, you're going to have to pop open the caterpillars, sticky business. But you will see weird things like cocoons on dead caterpillars, and usually that means parasitization has taken place. So among our biological control agents, we have there's hundreds of different species out there. We do have this Natural Enemies Handbook that's got a lot of information on all types of biological controls. And anytime you look in one of these books or a pest note about a pest, we always try to give you information about what the important biological control agents are for that particular pest. So general predators are species that feed on a wide range of different kinds of pests, so they're useful in our ecosystems, but they don't necessarily focus. So we have these carabid beetles that feed on soil insects, lacewing larvae that feed on a lot of different soft-bodied insects like aphids, and then the assassin bug that we saw before feeds on larger insects. And we have a whole variety of predatory bugs. So there's a lot of plant bugs, like stink bugs that are pests. Box elder bugs are in this group. But an awful lot of the bugs out there are actually predators. And so people think, well, I can recognize a predator. I know what a lady beetle looks like. But it might take me a few more minutes than that. Well, I know what but there's so many of these predators that look really just like pests. And so you want to try to begin to learn to identify these good ones. Lady beetles, the thing about lady beetles is most of them are specialized predators, so they're really useful if they focus on certain groups of pests. The convergent lady beetle, it's got these converging white marks here, feeds on just aphids. And so if the aphids are your problem, this is your answer. Caterpillars are your problem, this is not your answer. So don't buy lady beetles if caterpillars are your problem. The larvae is also a voracious feeder, and this is the life cycle. Many other red and black lady beetles out there that are native. We've got 200 or more species of lady beetles in California, but these red and black ones are primarily aphid feeders, so they focus on aphids. And there's other lady beetles that aren't as colorful, but they focus on other kinds of pests, like the mealybug destroyer focuses on mealybugs. Spider mite destroyer, this is a little teeny black one. Mites, twice stabbed on scales. And then the Bedaly beetle on the cottony cushion scale. So people are interested in biological control, want to know how to use them. And the thing they really want to do is, where can I buy them? And they want to spray them on their garden like a pesticide, which is what we would call augmentation. And the fact is there's very few predators that you can purchase that will actually be helpful in managing your pests in your garden. There are people who sell natural enemies, and some of them are helpful, but like actually releasing the convergent lady beetle, the nematodes, and occasionally maybe the predatory mites. But for home gardens, that's pretty much the limit of it. Mostly you want to be using the naturally occurring biological control that occurs in your garden, which we call conservation and enhancement. Classical biological control is where you bring in new species of a new species of natural enemy from the native home of the pest. Most of our plants are not native to California. Well, they came in and they had a honeymoon period like the eucalyptus, no pests for 100 years. But then, lo and behold, the pests come. And so then what do? Then you have to find out, where did these pests come from? So the eucalyptus lurpsil is a good example. Where did that pest come from? Well, it came from Australia. Entomologists go to Australia, search around in Australia, and find little parasites or predators that control it there, bring them back here, put them through a quarantine process, and release them here so we can get sort of a balance of nature here. A good example of a successful classical biological control program was the ash whitefly, which is a really big problem in the early 90s, all through California. Typical whitefly, just mostly on ashes, also on toyon, a little on citrus. It's got an unusual nymph here with wax on there. But they found out that came from the Mediterranean region. They went to Israel. They brought back this little parasitic wasp laying her eggs in the whitefly nymphs. and this little lady beetle, Cladostethus, that feeds on the nymphs too. Brought these in, put them through quarantine, found out they don't like to eat anything but whiteflies. That was cool. There's no beneficial whiteflies around. They were released in a few spots in California. They now have spread throughout California, and you don't see this whitefly anymore in numbers, but it's there. And I monitor the Toyon, and I see it there, and I also see these guys there. Wow. So they're keeping it at a very, very low level. So that is the ideal biological control, but you can't do that. You have to be a certified person with a certified quarantine facility, so on your next vacation, don't go to China looking for a parasite of the cotton moth. You are not supposed to bring living insects in, because that's how we get some of our problems. And what you need to focus on as a gardener, as a master gardener, is trying to help people enhance biological control in their gardens. These biological control agents will live longer and lay more eggs if they have sufficient water, nectar, and alternative food sources. So some people are interested in planting insectary plants with pollen and nectar sources, and that can enhance biological control. Most people's gardens have sufficient diversity of plants flowering at various times that they already have enough. Now, if you're a grower of a monoculture, like a lettuce grower that doesn't have flowers in their lettuce and keeps the weeds down, you can plant a row of alyssum, and that provides pollen and nectar for the natural enemies. That has been shown that can increase the biological control in a lettuce crop. Of course, now we found the alyssum is very attractive to the bagrata bug, and so we're going to have to reassess that recommendation. Controlling ants is really important, because ants tend, aphids, mealybugs, soft scales, other honeydew-producing insects, and they protect them from their natural enemies. They'll actually flick them off. So if you can keep the ants out of the plant, then the natural biological control can go on. And we found that by keeping ants out of trees with tanglefoot like that, we increased parasitization of soft scales to the extent that it was equal to a control with insecticidal oil in the scales. It's hard to control ants though. But the most important way is to avoid using pesticides that kill natural enemies in your garden. And so that's something we'll also be talking about later. But here's sort of a short list of insecticides. The less toxic materials, Bacillus thuringiensis, which is a bacterial disease of caterpillars, oils and soaps, are pretty compatible with natural enemies. What you want to stay away from are these materials: the pyrethroids, carbaryl 7, the organophosphates, the neonicotinoids. And the pyrethroids and spinosids can kill natural enemies, but are short-lived, so they have a less, so they can be used. They're sort of second choice materials. Pesticides in the home landscape are some of the most difficult questions you have as master gardeners, and so I'm going to have a whole other section on pesticides in a bit. But it's complicated, and that's why we tell you to rely on university publications if you have to tell anybody something about pesticides. So in summary, IPM strategy provides less risk to the health. We emphasize prevention of pests, and it should provide you with fewer pest problems. So you want to identify the pests, you want to think about the ecosystem and think about ways you could change that ecosystem so it's less favorable for your pest, and integrate least toxic methods. And now it is your break time.